to welcome to this morning's In the Hot Seat session from the Alliance on this very wet Friday morning. I'm Ruth Kieran, CEO of Circle and also the co-chair of the Alliance of Independent Agencies, and I'm responsible for the people pillar, which covers talent, ED and wellbeing. In today's session, we're joined by the formidable Justine Roberts, CBE, founder and CEO of MumsNet. I'm sure she doesn't need a huge amount of introduction to most of you, but for those of you that don't know Justine, she's the founder of one of the UK's largest, most influential online communities, sharing advice, support and product recommendations with over 8 million users. She's a non-exec director of a FTSE 100 insurance firm Admiral and of the Open Data Institute founded by Tim Berners-Lee. She's also a member of the government's Roads Review Board, and in 2011 she launched GrandsNet, a website for the original baby boom generation. She's got mother of 4 and was appointed CB in 2017 for service to the economy. So welcome to you, Justine. Very honoured to have you this morning.
Thanks, Ruth. Lovely to be here.
Great. So the topic we'd like your thoughts on today, which is obviously quite important to a lot of us, particularly running agencies, is what's causing the Great Resignation, as it's been called, and how we as the independent agency sector can attract and retain talent and particularly support women and parents, because obviously the world has changed a great deal in the last couple of years. So in terms of statistics, 1 in 6 women are considering leaving our industry, according to WACL. 3/4 of people are considering resigning across the board in the UK, which is quite a shocking statistic. 1/3 of women have scaled back or left their jobs since 2020. Childcare costs are up, and voluntary departures between April and May 2020 were higher than in the same period in 2019, according to the CMI. So it's obviously a real thing. So, I mean, from your opinion, what's causing this?
Yeah, so I think some of those voluntary departures that look like voluntary, judging from the discussion on MumsNet, are not really that voluntary. They're more that people have been forced out because of some of the things you've already cited, like high childcare costs, simply not being able to cope, having gone through lockdown, which meant, you know, having to homeschool and pin down a job. We know that 78% of our users said they felt like they were bad employees during that period and weren't doing a good job. And I think in the end, for some people, it just became too much. Mental health issues have rocketed amongst mothers and indeed amongst children during this period. So I think there's a certain amount of what looks like a kind of, you know, I'm reevaluating my life and going to go off and, you know, start my own pottery business, is actually much more grim, and it's people who simply can't cope with all the demands put on them during a very stressful time. And we do know that this is worse for mothers. So the IFS has said that, you know, during lockdown, mothers were able to do 1/3 of the uninterrupted paid work hours that fathers were. So it's kind of hit women harder, as much has during the pandemic. But then there is, you know, the other thing, which is the Great Resignation, which has, I think, affected everyone a little bit, in that we've all had a chance to reevaluate what's important, and sort of, in a way, hybrid working and not being in that sort of commuter, got to live in a big town and get to work and be at my desk. And, you know, it's made us think. It's made us think that there are alternatives out there, like relocation, like sort of downsizing your life a little bit and maybe your work commitments. So I think that's going to be a challenge for all employers, actually. How do you keep your staff? And it's exacerbated by the fact that hybrid working means we're not making the same social connections that we were at work. And much of the evidence suggests that what retains people is the fact they make friends at work. Yeah. And it's much harder to make friends over Zoom. Yeah. You know, especially when you're newer and entering the workplace, establishing those kind of connections is something that employers are really going to have to think about, how they make sure that the social glue is as firm as it ever was. So I think it's going to be a challenge for everyone.
Yeah. So I mean, so firstly, taking, I suppose, the sort of people changing their sort of focus on what's important. Have you seen a lot of that in terms of on your community, people discussing that about, you know, a change in priorities?
I think so. You know, as I say, I think some people are just kind of pretty exhausted and pretty, you know, I can't keep spinning all these plates anymore. It's all too much. There's too much anxiety around. You know, I heard on the radio today, actually, that a teacher saying that about 40% of their teenage students have yet to return to school properly full time because they're so anxious. Now, you know, those are all families, and those are all families having to deal with those kind of issues. So I think, you know, that, as I say, that one part of this is actually that people are in quite a lot of distress, and that's made them reevaluate things. The other part is, well, actually, you know, it's possible for me to go and work in Valencia and do my job, or you know, I can go freelance or a consultancy-based job where I'm not required to come in at all, and I'd rather like this lifestyle. So, you know, I'm gonna look at things differently. So, and also, let's face it, for a period, people were very worried about, you know, near death, and that makes you think of things like bucket lists, and that doesn't necessarily involve, you know, staying in your job, climbing the greasy pole. So I think it's a kind of cocktail of lots of things. And all what it means for us as employers, I think, is that we just have to be more mindful and work harder about, you know, why people would choose to stay in a role and what it is we can do to encourage all those factors that make it easier to retain people.
So in terms of sort of an employer addressing, if an employee says, I want changing priority, I want to go and work remotely from Valencia, how would you address that in terms of an employer's response to that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting and difficult. So I think, you know, I've just gone on about social glue and why it's important. But see, on the one hand, there's a, you know, desire to get people together, to create those bonds and to create those magical moments. And on the other, there's a desire to retain people who want to do work completely differently. And I think, like everything, I mean, I think you've got to be flexible. You know, I think the ideal, we've kind of, at MumsNet, decided that the ideal is 2 days a week in the office. But if we have, you know, a whole tech team who say, actually, we want to work from Valencia, I mean, you know, in the current climate, you'd have to listen to that, because so certainly in certain roles, you know, you can't really do without, it's a really competitive market. So I think, you know, we at MumsNet have always believed that, you know, you should be as individual and flexible as you possibly can, as long as the output produced is of sufficient quality. So in other words, an output-based culture rather than an hours-based culture, I think, is really helpful, actually, particularly for women. You know, if we look at what's produced and we measure things according to goals that we want you to achieve, rather than when you're doing things, then I think that a lot of this becomes a lot easier from a philosophical point of view. If you are running a business or a team, actually what you want is, you know, the outputs.
And do you think that that's always been the kind of, I suppose, working mums have always suggested that they are able to deliver highly productive in shorter spaces of time? And I think a lot of women or parents who work part-time will vouch for that often if they work a 4-day week, they're often not, there's nobody else picking up that work on a Friday or whatever day they're working, and actually they fit that work, a full-time job, into 4 days a week. And do you think that that's shifted, allowed people to start to see that you can be more productive in a shorter, and given sort of evidence for that productivity debate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any actual stats on that, but anecdotally, it's something that's always we've seen on MumsNet is, you know, I've gone down to 4 days, but I'm actually doing the same amount of work. And also women saying, look, if I'm going to go to work and be away from my kids, I'm damn well going to make sure that, you know, it's valuable and productive time. I'm not going to sit around and just, you know, discuss wallpaper or whatever it is. And we know that, you know, there are amazing stats about how unproductive people you know, historically have been in the office. So I think it's there's a stat from the American Bureau of Work or something that says on average people do 2 hours 56 minutes work in an 8-hour day in the office. So I think it's, you know, again, I haven't got actual stats about mothers' productivity, but I suspect because they are pressed and they have, you know, other demands, they're trying to achieve a lot. And that's certainly what they say. So yes, I think, you know, I do think one of the things we're all going to have to consider as part of this retention thing and trying to counteract the Great Resignation is a 4-day week.
Yes.
And I think I really think it's quite possible that you won't actually lose that much as an employer if you allowed everyone to work a 4-day a week, you know, flexibly. So it's not just no one's there on a Friday.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, I mean, we've seen in the industry that there's been recently some discussion around the 4-day week or agencies in particular moving to that. Yeah. I think the challenge there, as you talk about, is that if no one is around at all on a particular day, and if you're working with clients, how does that actually practically work? So, but that's a kind of innovation that I think is interesting, slightly terrifying to contemplate in certain ways. But I mean, do you think that we'll need a groundswell of businesses to start doing it before you see real change?
Well, I just think it will become one of those things that you compete on. You know, we're in a competitive market for recruitment, and if other people start doing it, then, you know, eventually everyone might be forced into it. But and yes, there are challenges about how you operate these systems, and it's always been a thing. You know, why can't you have job shares? Why can't people work fewer hours in businesses where they're sort of dealing with customers and clients? But again, you know, if we measured people on what they produce and not about whether they were actually sitting at their desks, it's perfectly possible to be available for an important client, even on, you know, in theory, a time when you're not working. You know, it's about flexing up and flexing down, really. But if we measured, I just think it's so bizarre that we measure people's time and not what they produce. And it's quite hard to measure what people produce because it means you have to have really, you know, good management that sets really clear goals and really knows what the output should be. But, you know, we've experimented with things where we've said, you know, if you produce these targets in the month, whenever you finish and reach them, you can have the rest of the time off.
Wow.
It doesn't work with all roles, but in, say, content production, it really does. So if you want to work, you know, super hard for the first 2.5 weeks of the month and get everything done, and then go and spend 10 days in the south of France, that's entirely available to you. And why not? Because in the end, for us, we just want the content produced.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the trust between the employer and the employee, that you don't just then make them work harder and say, well, actually, you know, keep dangling, you know,
well,
you're obviously very efficient.
You know, the challenge here is setting the right targets.
Yeah.
So you want to set, you know, demanding targets, but achievable targets that mean that people, you know, have an incentive to get it done because they feel that they're getting their time back. And what, you know, the idea that you know, people go off to university, we don't own their time then, we just ask them to produce something, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly you go into the workplace and you're infantilized again. And yeah, I think this is a big opportunity that the COVID's given us, so that we've sort of got halfway there to working in a way where you can't really monitor what everyone's doing all the time, so you have to trust.
Yes.
And the way to sort of get over that trust thing is to set very clear and measurable goals and targets for people.
Yeah, and I suppose a lot of businesses, and particularly in our industry, in marketing, there's a lot of timesheets, time, hours, hourly budgets based on amount of time spent on work rather than outputs, as you say. Yeah. So maybe that's a shift, because budgets are often set by, you know, you'll get X amount of hours of these people, which actually isn't actually the right way. If you talk about that in terms of outputs, the right way to do it. So it's kind of,
I mean, you know, I don't know whether that's a pressure coming from the customers or whether that's just the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
But either way, I think if you asked anyone honestly what they actually want, what they want is the result.
Yes, I mean, that's a whole value-based pricing is a whole nother debate.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting debate in terms of COVID encouraging us from this kind of presenteeism 8 hours in the office, how much of that is actually productive, to I think everyone's become much more productive, probably slightly lonelier, but highly productive. The amount of meetings that we can all fit in a day compared to when we were dashing all over the place with travel is very different.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of quiet time to actually get your head down and do something.
Yes, yeah. So,
but I do think, you know, as said already, I think, you know, ultimately, remote working, if it's every day of the week, is you do lose something.
Yes.
You lose something to do with, you know, both that sort of, as I've said, social glue, but also creativity and bouncing, all that sort of water cooler, bouncing ideas off stuff. So for me as an employer, I think that the ideal is probably 40% collective and 60% quiet, where you can be really productive in your own space.
Yeah. And are you, I mean, as mums, are you sort of baking that into your contracts, or is that a very kind of open, grown up discussion rather than a kind of, this is what we're doing and we're going to change our terms? I
mean, we've said that we expect people, I mean, actually at the moment it's only 1 day a week, but we're moving in Q2 to 2 days a week. But we've also said we will listen to any individual set of reasons or petition for doing it differently, and we'll take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, particularly with cost of living increasing, obviously the fuel crisis at the moment, and national insurance that increases, I think when everyone's sort of realised that the commuting costs, they no longer have to, you know, worth financially bearing individually, and particularly if you're a junior member of the team, or if you're a mother or, you know, father with childcare costs on top of the commute cost. I mean, it is very, very expensive to commute into the office. So
it is, and people have got used to not, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like, well, that's like a pay cut, really.
Yes.
But I think, you know, the onus is to be reasonable. I mean, you know, it was the case a couple of years ago that people were coming in 5 days a week and having to find childcare 5 days a week to pick their kids up from school. So I think, you know, it's about balance, it's about listening, it's about being as flexible as you can, but also, you know, explaining that it's to everyone's benefit, that you make relationships at work, that you can learn from other people's experience, that you can watch role models and become better at what you do. And that actually, for mental health reasons, you actually get out the house. And for health reasons, actually, you walk around a bit and don't stay locked to a screen. So I think, you know, I think all those things are perfectly explainable.
Yeah.
It's about communication.
And do you think that the challenges of those people for hybrid working, and you've talked about the past, that it may be that men have more of an advantage when they come back. We come back out of it, because a lot of those women who've had to flex, that sort of presenteeism, being in the office, being present and visible, may impact those people who then can't come back in for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it is more likely to be women. For whatever reason, we are where we are. Mothers are the ones who tend to feel that they are going to be the ones who need to be near the school if there's an emergency, or doing other kind of caring responsibilities, or have just, you know, taken on more of the domestic responsibilities. And I think it is really important that employers think very carefully about how they include remote workers, and make sure that they are part of the big decisions and the decision making, and really, as far as they possibly can, are equal in terms of their, you know, how much they're listened to. And that's again, it's a bit of a operational challenge, but it's not insurmountable. And I think as long as the culture is one of always, you know, being inclusive, making sure meetings, you know, you have the technology to make your meetings work, making sure your hours are in core hours when it works for everyone, that kind of thing. It's not insurmountable, but it does require a little bit of thought and intervention. It won't happen naturally. We can all see how, in the same way that part-time workers have tended to lose their seniority, It could be that there's a two-tier system here, and that's bad for employers, right? Because ultimately you're not getting the most out of your talent if the better people are somehow degraded in terms of what they're offering the business. So yeah, I think it's something every HR department needs to think about carefully, about how this works in actual practice. But being mindful is the first step, I think, of the risks.
Have you seen it? I mean, have you seen any innovations or other businesses doing that well, or have you seen anything that you thought that's a great approach?
I think there are some pretty basic things about always just, if you're chairing a meeting and there's some people in it remotely, making sure they have equal time and say. Making sure they can hear, making sure that people aren't doing little asides, in the room that they can't hear, making sure you schedule those meetings at times which are achievable for everyone. But so the biggest thing I think is mindfulness about it.
And in terms of sort of as we sort of move out of this, do you think that there's, I mean, my view is that it will always, I can't imagine it going back to full on 5 days. Do you think this is always going to be something that we'll look back on and pre-COVID can't believe that we ever did the 5-day commute? Do you think it'll always be this way going forward?
I think, I mean, I read a stat the other day that said that 30% of businesses were considering fully remote. So, that feels like we're not coming back from that. There will be a portion of businesses where they have a flexible office, and they're not gonna make people come in at all. I think from what I see of big businesses, they're mostly considering a hybrid setup and not insisting on everyone coming back in the office full time. And I kind of agree with you. I think this is, it's the one thing that's come out of this which makes me, unremittingly joyous, really, is women, women in particular have been asking for flex as the most important thing. 86% of our users, when we surveyed them, said it was the most important thing they looked for in the role. And, we've managed to work remotely without the sky falling in, and I think and all the operational stuff that was needed to get there, that probably would have taken 10 years, had to happen in a matter of weeks. And that, so we now have the infrastructure to do it. So that in itself is a huge change. So I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were. But as I say, I think it will be, depending on the business, depending on the customers, depending on who you're trying to service, how much of business goes, back to in an office versus outside.
I mean, I think pre-pandemic, you wouldn't. It was a bit odd to do a video call, wasn't it? I mean, you just wouldn't. You'd do face-to-face, or you might have a phone call, but you certainly wouldn't, offer up a video call naturally unless you had to. So whereas
and if you think about it, why not? It's so much more efficient. I mean, not every time, but it is so much more efficient. And that's the thing. I mean, I think the productivity gain that's come out of this is undeniable. Now, look, we've already said there are downsides, and mental health and all the rest of it is some of it. But I think businesses have to recognise there's been a productivity.
And also, I suppose the sort of taking down the walls of professional versus personal lives. Everybody seeing their children and their cats and the dogs, and good days, bad days. And actually, that's probably been a great thing. And client versus supplier. Maybe a little bit of kind of bonding. I mean, I think that certainly has been something that has perhaps allowed women in particular to demonstrate what's going on for them outside of their professional image.
The take your whole self to work thing is, I mean, it's right, actually work is coming to your whole self, really, is the way it's gone. And I mean, I worked in the city a long time ago in an investment bank, and I left as soon as I got pregnant because the women who I saw who had progressed basically had to pretend their kids didn't exist. And the men did too, but that was less of an issue for them, I think. And now we don't have that. We have lots of meetings where young children come wandering in, or partners come wandering in, or there are people in the background doing laundry or something. And it's fine, the world hasn't fallen in.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of representation of women and real life, I mean, what can we as marketing agencies do to make sure that we're representing women and mothers positively and parents positively in the work that we do in terms of, I suppose, presenting those images out into the world, because that's obviously part of what we do as well.
Yeah. So I'm a member of WACL, and from that there was a whole What Women Want campaign, where we did a lot of work on this, looking at particular, marketing messages and how women were portrayed in that. And I think it was Diageo who did a fantastic sort of piece of work on unconscious bias, where they looked at their own output. And, things like, for Diageo, it was all about the drinks business, and, the bartenders were always men. Women in their ads were always just sort of passively being bought drinks or sitting there giggling, and the men were doing all the action. It's things like that. I mean, I have a particular bugbear with the marketing industry and older people, actually, not just women. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that 80% of the wealth in this country is in the hands of the over 55s, and yet 20% marketing budgets are towards the over 55s. Why is that? It doesn't make sense. And I do think the marketing industry needs to look at itself. And, there's this kind of obsession with the new, young, shiny thing. Is that actually doing right by your customers, who are, trying to sell product, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, having run MumsNet for a bit now, and the type of advertisers who come to MumsNet, often via media agencies, tend to be, stair lifts and cruise liners. And yet these women are, our average age of our user of MumsNet is 56.
Yeah.
And they have very high disposable income, and they talk about sex and beauty products all the time.
They're not thinking about a stair lift to get up there.
So that kind of prejudice, which I think is endemic, is I don't think serving the people you're meant to be serving that well, and certainly not serving the audience, who are pretty angry about it.
Yeah, and I think that goes for kind of representing what women are like, what mums are like, the stereotypical. I mean, in the past, sort of pen portraits or demographics, and actually we've come a long way, but there's a lot more to be done, and certainly around age, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a reflection of society as a whole, to be honest. We all have unconscious bias. We're all socialized from a very young age, and I think it's important to basically have an honest unpick of that, and look at the work you do through with an eye of, if I put a different person into this position all the time, how would that feel and look, and what is it that's going on behind the scenes here that makes us come up with the type of creative and the type of portrayal that we do. And as I say, that work Diageo did, that I think is probably available widely. I just encourage everyone to do that, and forensically go through what they produce with a sort of clear eye and a marker pen, and an honest look.
And I think that goes for sort of getting returners back into the industry, retaining older women, diversity in terms of where are we recruiting from, because if you're not representative in terms of your agency makeup, or you're not going to be producing work, as you say, that is, that through that lens somebody can say, well, hang on a minute, this doesn't represent me,
absolutely,
my age group, or my life stage.
I mean, that goes for all diversity and all recruitment of all minority groups that are underrepresented in the industry. You have to work a bit harder, probably. You have to get over the unconscious bias at interview, but you probably also have to get more people to apply, because older women probably think a media agency is not for me. Why would they think it was, when there's no one over the age of 45 in them? And so you have to work a bit harder about how you get them to apply. You probably, and this goes for BAME and all minorities really, probably have to, one of the things that I was talking to head of Channel 4 about this. One of the things they've done, this is about really recruiting senior women, is they've given them a break on experience. So they've said, look, we might have to accept that they haven't quite got the experience of some of the 50-year-old men we're interviewing for these roles, because they simply, they've had time out to have kids, or they've, their lives have taken a different course and they haven't been offered the opportunities, or as we know, they simply haven't applied, because women, will only apply for jobs when they've got all the qualifications, whereas men, it's been documented, will apply for jobs when they're only 60% qualified for them. So you have to work a bit harder to get these people, in the mix. And that means, making sure if you're using recruiters that you insist that there's a diverse candidate list that you can look at, a diverse shortlist, and maybe giving people a break on experience and saying, you may not quite have had the 7 years experience at running this department that we perhaps would think is ideal, but there are reasons for that, and we're going to consider it, we're going to look at it a different way.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly true, because there's people are saying in our industry we can't find the people, but I'm sure the people they're just not necessarily in the obvious places that we looked before. So it's about being more creative about the channels, and as you said, possibly broadening our requirements, or having different requirements.
Absolutely, and there's evidence that shows that this sort of departure of the workplace thing is most prevalent in over 50-year-old women. So there's a lot of 50-something women out there who are available, and they've clearly got experience, and they're actually unencumbered by having small kids running around, probably have a lot of time. So I mean, I think ageism is a problem in society. It's not just in marketing, but I just think it's a business opportunity. Yeah.
I think we've had a lot of discussion in our industry around menopause and menopause policies. Back in July, an agency called Dark Horses launched an open source menopause policy to try and get people to talk about that, because it was an unspoken taboo, because women don't want to mention how old they are. There's a desperate kind of, we're all going to be cryogenically frozen at 35, because you can't possibly age. But I suppose it's really important to be open, and for women to role model and talk about it, because again, what might cause people to leave around that period of their life as well.
Yeah, and for some women, particularly with the kind of levels of patchy kind of treatment in this country for the menopause and the availability of HRT, they do go through a really horrific time. And I think you're exactly right, allowing women to talk about it openly, so they can actually, and we on MumsNet, it's a huge conversation. On GrandsNet, it's an even bigger conversation. I think it is so many women seem to be offered antidepressants rather than HRT, and that's just a crime. And part of that is a difficult time, where if they're going through various symptoms, not getting the treatment they need, and can't talk about it at work at all, then yes, the upshot is people leave and you lose your talent again. So like anything, I think, this should be a business decision, and it's about keeping talent in the workplace. And there are some pretty easy things you can do, but as you say, one of the key ones is to not make it a taboo subject.
Well, what other things could employers do? I mean, have you seen any good examples of what people have done in terms of policies or practices?
I think again, Channel 4 have a really good set of policies around, menopause leave and time off to get treatment and things like that. I haven't got a list in my head, but if anyone wants to go and look, I think they've done some really good work here.
In terms of kind of other things like miscarriage leave, other sort of things where previously it's been very, it's an unspoken thing. What else can employers do in terms of other policies?
For me, the big one is paternity leave.
Yeah.
Because in the end, all this sort of, this whole conversation really is about how we level the playing field for men and women. And the playing field really only becomes unlevel after motherhood.
Yeah.
And this idea that we have that really having children is the mother's responsibility. And when people talk about the cost of childcare, they often compare it to the mother's earnings. And rather than, there are usually two people involved, pretty much always, rather than a joint responsibility. And all the studies show from mostly Nordic countries, as you expect, that men who are more involved in the first year of their baby's life stay much more involved. So you have a situation now where, when we survey MumsNet users, and it's getting a bit better, but it's still the case that, that raft of domestic stuff around children, like liaising with the school or arranging play dates or birthday parties, is almost 100% still done by mothers. It's still mother's responsibility. And it's all, and the mental load that goes, the project management of the family belongs to the mothers. And that's the thing that breaks people. But if men are more involved and they take proper parental leave and they are, the sole adult responsible during that first year for some of that time, looking after that child, they get that. They suddenly get the mental load thing. They understand it and they are more involved. And that's better for the family. It's better for the mother. And it's, it's probably, it's better for the father too, frankly. I think so parental leave, which is, for the proper paid paternity leave is I think key. And it's a scary thing, because we all know that, especially if you're a small business, you have people going off on maternity leave. And we have a lot of this because we're MumsNet. We employ a lot of people who want to be mothers and who are mothers and fathers. It can be costly, but it can also provide, if you look at it, great opportunities for people to step up, opportunities to promote people who are doing good things, to test them out in roles. And I just think you just view it as a workplace challenge that is just one of those things. But I think in the end, it's been good for us, actually. All our periods where people have taken maternity leave, if you do it and paternity leave, we offer the pretty much equal maternity and paternity leave. Has provided opportunities for us to bring people on, and it really definitely helps with retention if you have decent policies.
I mean, in terms of, do you think we'll get to a stage where we just have gender neutral parental leave as a kind of matter of course rather than a default maternity? What's your view?
I mean, I think we should. It's quite a costly thing for both government and business to contemplate, but we know that there's massive discrimination that affects mothers, not fathers, when they have children. So there's a lot of unconscious bias there. 46% of people apparently believe that mums become less committed to their job when they have a child, whereas it's only 11% for men. And actually, some people, there is a kind of daddy bonus. In stark contrast, 29% of people believe dads become more committed after having a child.
Wow.
So, all this stuff goes away if there's equal parental leave. All this sort of discrimination when you're hiring, should I hire this woman because she's, of that age? And, suddenly that's not a thing anymore. If we believe that men are going to take an equal share of looking after that child.
And in your the period of which you've run MumsNet, have you seen things improve? I mean, are you optimistic in terms of what you've seen?
Yeah, I am, because when we do these surveys about who's doing all the domestic drudge, and there is a bit of a difference between older mums and younger mums. The younger mums seem to have a slightly more equitable setup It's not equitable, by the way. It's far
Yeah.
from 50-50, but it's much more like 70-30 than 90-10. So it does seem that there is, progress. But as I say, there is no gender pay gap until motherhood. It's a motherhood pay gap, actually. And it's really important for women. So many women who leave the workplace and then they don't have a pension and they just lose their economic empowerment. When, if we could have a system where we look, that you're a parent for a long time, but the crux of it, the bit that really, is tough, is the first sort of 4 years or so before they go to school. If we could have a system where, we view that as just a period in our working life, we're going to work for a long time.
Yeah.
And we just, yes, we may end up break even, although again, I say the father's salary should also be included in the calculation, but even if it isn't, but for God's sake, find a way to keep people in work.
Yeah.
Because if they lose the workplace, it's much harder to come back.
Yeah.
And it's very heartbreaking on MumsNet, the number of stories you see of women who've, I haven't worked for 5 years. I don't know what Slack is. I feel completely useless. I've lost all my confidence. And, that talent is lost, frankly.
Yeah. And that's contingent on us as sort of HR agency leaders, line managers, to make sure that we do everything in our power to stop those women if they're in that very, very difficult period with very young children before school, and even when they're very, in early years. It is the toughest part of that parental journey. So if we can be, and I think the flexibility, I hope that the pandemic and I'm sure flexible working and hybrid working is helping a little on that, because a full-time commute is very different to being able to pop out and pick up your child. So I'm hoping it is improving. But that shows some positivity, that in your sort of perception, things are with the younger mothers and their partnerships, it is becoming more equitable, but a long way to go. Yeah,
I think that's right. And also the other big change over the 20 years is basically most households are dual income households now. When we started, roughly half of the people on MumsNet were work in the home mums, so stay-at-home mums, and not working for money anyway. And now that's just not the case. 80% of our users work for either part-time or full-time. So this is people rely on dual incomes now, and they find it very hard to do without. And as we've already mentioned, the cost of living crisis. So keeping women in work is really important for households' financial security, for the economy, and most particularly for women's own economic empowerment, really.
I'm going to open the floor, if I can, on the Q&A. If anybody's got any questions. Terry, I think I've got one question here from Chris. Justine answered my first query, which was, how do people in client service work a 4-day week when arguably we're a 24/7 industry, by talking about the opportunity for business leaders to flex up and down and take a call on a day when they're not meant to be working. I'd love to see this work, but would be worried about already breaking our own rules before we get out the gate. People put themselves under so much pressure, sometimes cannot self-police even at senior level. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that sort of, when people ask me about work-life balance, I kind of can't see the difference. The lines are so blurred, I think you have to carve out boundaries always, and that includes whether you're working 4 days or 5 days or however many days. You need to sort of say to you, what's important to me? And at that point, I am actually not available. And that might be having a family dinner, or it might be, your yoga class or whatever it is. And that's inviolate. But I think we are quite used to now, being flexible. And I find, I literally have my employees now say to me, I'm just going off now because I'm going to have my nap. in the middle of the day now, and that's fine, right? Because they need their nap. They've chosen to do that. They know what their targets are. They know what, and I just think, again, it's about, can you produce? Can you produce? And the part of this pressure is, you don't have clear targets. If you don't have clear targets about what success looks like or not, then you're always on that sort of treadmill of trying to keep running in case I haven't actually achieved what I was supposed to achieve. So for me, moving to an output-based system rather than an input-based system is actually healthier, because you know what you know where you stand, you know what you've got to do, and you can turn your phone off, frankly, and leave a nice message saying, if anyone needs me, I'm just offline for a couple of hours, but I'll definitely be looking back in whenever. So yeah, for me, I think I know what you're saying, but I actually think it's all part of this. People shouldn't own your time; they should own what what your results.
Yeah. I've got a question from Charlie. Any tips on women working in marketing who haven't yet entered motherhood? Ways to navigate that initial journey to help minimise disrupting work, life and career?
Yeah, I think you're already halfway there, frankly, because I think the key to this is thinking about it from the moment, you conceive, really. So many women, go off and have the baby, and then when they want to come back, they start thinking about, and actually it's all that stuff which can feel a bit icky, but are you maintaining your relationships with the work? Are you staying in touch? Are you making sure your CV, just doesn't have a 5-year gap? You're doing things within that show that that you're useful, that you've kept your skills going, all that kind of thing. So keep your social capital going, think about your CV, have really upfront, honest conversations with your employer about, how you want to work when you come back, that if you want to work flexibly or part-time, you need to be honest about it, but also give them solutions. This is how you're going to achieve doing your job. I'm going to make this work because I'm going to do X, Y, Z. So I think you're really halfway there, because you're thinking about it already, and so many people don't. So good luck.
Great.
It can be done.
Any other questions from the?
Yeah, there's one more which has come through. Is basically there's a recent report that suggests that there's still a 10% difference between men and women in pay. So what can we do more to actually reduce this unacceptable gap?
Yeah, I mean, the gender pay gap, I'm afraid, has been extended by the pandemic, because women were more likely to be laid off and more likely to leave employment. They were more likely to be furloughed, and they were more likely to, as ever, eschew promotion. Because of all the extra pressure put on them by the pandemic. So I think they think that's added another 20 years to the closing of the gender pay gap. For me, as I've kind of said, this isn't really about gender. I don't think there are many childless women who are being discriminated against on pay. It happens when women have children. And what it is a pay gap between mothers and fathers. So fathers don't experience, there's that sort of reduced promotion opportunities. They don't want to downsize their lives because they're doing all the caring, because the mothers are doing all the caring. So it comes down to, I think, what can you do about it? You can, in your own life, you can insist on a more equitable, if you have a child, insist on a more equitable, and I should have said that to the last person, actually, the way to prepare for this as well is to have honest conversations with your partner you're having this child with, and make sure that you are going to do things as equitably as you want to, as you can. So insist on that. And it's up to employers to do some of these policies that we've been talking about that make it possible for their talent to thrive in a situation where they have caring responsibilities. And it's not just mothers, it's people who have other caring responsibilities as well. You know, you might be looking after an elderly parent or something. So just, and I think there's very good economic reasons why your employer should do that for you, because otherwise you will just not reach your potential. And we've all invested in people to make sure they reach their potential.
I think that's a really key point, because for employers, again, it's important to retain that individual through their parenting journey and out the other side, because often the loyalty and the kind of effort and commitment you give to that employee, they'll return when they're sort of not necessarily back up and run, but they have more time and less commitments on the childcare front. So I think it's certainly a two-way street. There's another question saying, really enjoying from Catherine, really enjoying the discussion and agreeing with a great deal. As a woman in marketing who's worked all the way through with 3 kids and now in the menopause group, I just wonder where women like me are. There just aren't women that are seen aged over 50 in the agencies. So we need to shout out a bit more, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. And I think as I've said, agencies are doing their clients a disservice, because the customers, I mean, I haven't got the stat on me, but an enormous amount of the population of this country are over 50, and most of the wealth is there as well. So I just think there's a real opportunity for agencies to take this on, actually. And it's not just in marketing. I mean, you know, you look at the film industry, you know, there was some sudden outcry when they made that film for oldies, which was the Marigold Hotel. No one could understand why it was breaking box office records, because, you know, films like that just weren't being made. Because then, I guess, because they're just not sexy. And, you know, it's this inbuilt prejudice we have. But you know, there is an audience, and we are businesses. And as businesses, you know, we're trying to maximise the output comes for our customers. So why not target an audience that's largely neglected and will really value it? And to do that, you've got to understand that audience, and so you've got to have employees. The same with all, you know, the agencies need to reflect the audience that they're serving, and this country is very diverse, age-wise, you know, ethnicity-wise, etc., etc.
And I suppose it's for older women to be role models, to sort of stand up and communicate and be out there and talk about that and those things, because if you don't see it, you don't believe it exists.
Yeah, and WACL are very good. They have a whole speak up thing for the industry. But yeah, as I say, without some of these policies we've been talking about, it's not surprising women don't progress in the industry and don't stay in. And well done for the person who asked the question. You made it, you know, you're unusual. And really, we should be asking you how you did it, because you are the role model and other people have got to learn from you. Yeah,
absolutely. Are there any more questions, Terry?
No, that's it.
Oh, we have apparently a lot of hard work and a great husband.
Yeah,
is the reason why.
It does help, yeah.
So, and just, I mean, finally for me, I mean, as a female entrepreneur and somebody who has built something from scratch, what advice have you got to women working in the industry who might harbour aspirations of starting up on their own? And you talk about people making a change and being consultants or freelancers. What's your advice to those women?
Well, I think if you want to start any business, you have to be very clear about what your unique selling point is, really. Why are you doing it? What problem are you trying to solve? I think if it was, you know, you can't just start a business because it's a lifestyle choice. It's not a lifestyle choice, you know. It's you're going to probably have to work even harder than you work now, but you need to be passionate about solving a problem, because otherwise I think when it gets difficult, you won't have the resilience to stick it through. So do you have a real passion? Is there a unique thing that you want to change or do differently? And it might be, quite frankly, employee culture. You know, one of the reasons I started MumsNet was because I'd come out of, I'd worked in the city and then I was a football reporter. These were incredibly male-dominated environments where women just weren't, I mean, they were invisible, but the ones who were there had to sort of be more macho than the boys. So I partly it was about creating a different culture and actually saying, look, we all know family comes first, you know, so why not admit it in your workplace and say, look, family comes first, we hope work comes, you know, somewhere next, but you never have to miss the school play, you never have to feel guilty if your child's ill and you've got to go and look after them. So that was, that was partly what it was about. And I thought, oh, I'll be able to get all these great women to come and work for me, because that's not what the world's like, you know, and it was true to some extent. But I also kind of had to have a need, a user need, a customer need that I was solving, and ours was, you know, allowing people to discuss all the issues that mattered to them. And when I say people, I really mean women. That you will make their lives easier. They'll be able to tap into the knowledge of others, and the internet gave us an opportunity to do that. So the number one for me is make sure you know what your job to be done is. What pain point are you solving? My second thing is make lots of mistakes as early as you can and learn from them. So be bold, but make mistakes. Before you don't be too wedded to your thoughts. Go out there and try it, get it into whatever it is, get going as soon as you can and test and learn. You'll need to embrace the chaos. If you are if you're running your own business, as I say, you probably have to work harder than ever. So you have to let some stuff slip, and again, work out what's important and focus on that, and then let everything else slide, basically. And then my final tip, which I always give on these things, is wear trainers. And I was watching The Apprentice last night, and I'm always just so disheartened by the women on The Apprentice. All of them have heels like this.
Yeah, wearing their little tight dresses and heels. I think that's not, I mean, that's something the pandemic has done for us. We've all ended up back in our flat shoes.
And they you know, they do that task where they have to run around sort of shopping centres, and they can't run. Anyway, I wear trainers because, you know, in the old days when I used to go from meeting to meeting, it was actually my way of doing gym without having to pay for a gym. And it was better for my feet.
Great tip. I thank you so much for your time and wise words. I think it's been a really interesting, very wide-ranging discussion, and I hope that the people on the call have learned a lot, and will be able to take some tips back to our agencies and our people, and hopefully start to sort of incorporate things to improve things for women in the industry and retain women that we need to retain. So thank you very much for your time. It's really
my pleasure.
Appreciated.
Very nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. The next, just for everybody, the next In the Hot Seat is with Gideon Spanier, of the editor of Campaign, looking at the growth of independence, what independence can do to drive their fame. So just thank you everybody for dialing in, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thanks, Terry.